Salam alaikum. Thank you, Mechid. Congratulations to Bolaq Analysts Network and Katib Cultural Association for organizing this really important two-day conference. And thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm really honored to be your guest. And I'm also a new immigrant in Denmark, so like some of you. Before I get into my speech, I also just want to pay respect to those who lost family in yesterday's horrific attack at Kaaj Academy. It's a tragedy, another tragedy. It's not enough just to condemn and offer condolences. I do that, but it's not enough. This should be front page news in every major international media outlet. Was it? Not so much. The Human Rights Council is meeting right now, and Dr. Soraya Dalil has come from Geneva. It should have stopped in its tracks yesterday and discussed this issue. It did not. Hazaras have been targeted for years and continue to be targeted. The previous government failed to protect Hazaras in Dashti Bachi, and so is the Taliban failing. Students are not targets. And ethnic and religious hatred is a crime. So I want to start from that point. And I will start off perhaps by briefly covering my mandate and my activities so far. I was appointed on the 1st of April. I got started on the 1st of May. I went to Afghanistan. I came back. I made a statement, and I recently made my first major report, which was to the Human Rights Council. And there was 2 weeks ago two events at the Human Rights Council. One was a discussion around my report, and the other was a special discussion. It's called interactive dialogue in the UN jargon, on the situation of Afghan women. And it was possible for Afghan women to participate and speak in that discussion. Referring to my first report, there are several paragraphs that refer to the situation of ethnic and religious minorities in Afghanistan. And I refer specifically to attacks on Hazara in paragraphs 64, 65, 66, 67, and 70, if you want to have a look at it. I'll just pick out a little bit of the language now. I say, I guess what's obvious, I say I'm seriously concerned about the situation of minorities. Places of worship, educational and medical centers have been systematically attacked, and their members have been arbitrarily arrested, tortured, summarily executed, evicted, marginalized, and in some cases forced to flee the country. I say that Hazaras, who are overwhelmingly Shia, are historically one of the most severely persecuted groups in Afghanistan, and their members are subject to multiple forms of discrimination, affecting a broad spectrum of human rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights. that the Taliban have appointed Pashtuns to senior positions in government structures in Hazara-dominated provinces, have forcibly evicted Hazaras without adequate prior notice from their homes and imposed religious taxation contrary to Shia principles. There are reports of arbitrary arrest, torture, and other ill treatment, summary executions, and forced disappearances. An increase in inflammatory speech is being reported both online and in some mosques during Friday prayers, including calling for Hazaras to be killed. I've received submissions and representations from Hazara regarding ill treatment and exclusion. The attacks are frequently claimed by ISKP, and the historical persecution of Hazara and other minorities appear to be systematic in nature and reflect elements of an organizational policy, thus bearing the hallmarks of international crimes, including crimes against humanity. And I say that the de facto authorities have a duty to protect all the population of Afghanistan, and this includes safeguarding schools and educational centers, places of worship, and other locations. I made a recommendation in relation to this, both to the de facto authorities, and I'm not going to refer any further to that. But if you want to look at it, it's paragraph 98C. And I also made a recommendation to governments, members of the international community, in paragraph 99B. I call on them to take necessary measures to strengthen accountability for human rights violations and abuses, including through my mandate and others, including other potential mechanisms to address impunity, provide redress for survivors and victims, and bring perpetrators to justice. My next steps will be to intensify my study into the situation of Hazara and other ethnic and religious minorities in Afghanistan. I'm due to report to the General Assembly, and I'll do that at the end of, actually this month, it's the 1st of October. So on the 27th, I will be in New York at the General Assembly, presenting a written report and also making an oral intervention in that forum. Perhaps you might be interested in generating some coverage and some events in the US. I know some of you have come from the US for this conference this weekend. Having said that, I'm also honored to be participating in the book launch, Unfinished Stories, by Mr. Hassan Raza Changezi. I had a chance to look at the book. I haven't read all of it, but I also want to congratulate the translators, because I thought it was an excellent translation into English. I particularly read chapter 4 of the book, which is called "For What Sins Are We Killed?" And it talks about the daughter of the author who came home from school one day in Quetta. It would have been, I think, 2011. It was more than 10 years ago. And it was the day after a bombing, a double bombing in Alamdar Road in Quetta, which killed 115 people and injured more than 200. And his daughter comes home from school the next day. And he says, Baba, she says, Baba, why did they kill us? What is our crime? What have we done to deserve this? And the story, the essay that Hassan Raza Changezi writes is about how difficult it is to answer these questions. And he concludes, there are no easy answers. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this book, and I hope that everyone here reads the book as well. I apologize that I will not be able to attend the panel when the reviewers and the translators speak about the book. I wish I was there for that, and I will also, unfortunately, miss the other panel later on, Is It Genocide? But I am going to, this is because there are in fact 2 events on Afghanistan today in Copenhagen by sheer coincidence. And the other one, which is by Afghan lawyers in Europe, I also promised to attend, so I will go to that, and then I'll come back here later. And I look forward to hearing more from you, but I'm sorry to miss these afternoon sessions, including the presentation in more detail of the Hazara Genocide Archive, which Mr. Habib Paiman spoke about to some degree this morning. I want to say that there's a good deal of caution in the UN system about referring to the issue of genocide. My view is that the UN should, and the different countries who are members of the UN, should not shy away from this issue. It applies not only to Hazara, but to the concept more generally, in other places too. But it is also necessary to be very careful from a legal and a political point of view around this issue. It's not my place to say whether genocide is occurring in Afghanistan or not. It's the role of a court to determine whether this law has been violated, in particular, as has been mentioned this morning, the International Criminal Court. In a sense, the notion of genocide seems to have both a legal approach, where it is for a court to decide based on evidence, and it's become a rather political term. Because we note, I'll give you one example, that the US, for example, has declared that the situation in Xinjiang, China, is a genocide. Now that's a political call, not a legal one. So I think we need to bear in mind, when we're using the term, both of these approaches. I'd be very interested to follow the discussion this afternoon of, is it genocide, from that point of view. But I was also interested in the question from Dr. Yahya Baiza, who I think made a very good point about the contribution that scholars can make to this important issue. And I'd like to add another publication to the ones that he suggested. He referred to Raphael Lemkin. And I'd like to, I'm running out of time or getting water? Okay, water, thank you. I'd like to refer to another publication which made a really big impact on me. It's a book called East-West Street. It's written by Philippe Sands, and Philippe Sands is a famous British barrister and author. The subtitle is On the Origins of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity. And Mr. Sands himself's grandfather came from the same city that two lawyers came from, Raphael Lemkin and Hirsch Lauterpacht. This city is Lviv in the east of Ukraine. Probably we hadn't heard much about Lviv, many of us, until this year when it became quite famous. They both came from that city, one to the UK and the other to the US. And before and especially during the Second World War, they developed the concepts, Lemkin about genocide and Lauterpacht about crimes against humanity. And both were involved in the development of the Nuremberg trials at the end of the Second World War. And I think, because it's been mentioned already this morning, that it's important to look at history, at the past, to see how egregious crimes based around, especially those based around religious and ethnic issues, have been dealt with to help inform the present. Because these have found their way, the work of these two scholars, who both of them Jewish, and I just add a little personal note to this. My own great-grandfather, father and grandmother, also Jewish, came from the same part of Eastern Europe, and they emigrated. Didn't emigrate. They were refugees, pushed out in the late 19th century they were going to go to the US, but they got stuck in the UK. And I was born in the UK, and then my family emigrated to New Zealand. My grandmother emigrated to New Zealand first, and then her children. But so it kind of makes a little bit of personal sense to me as well to look at these issues. But they found their way into the Rome Statute, both genocide and crimes against humanity. And in the Rome Statute, they're treated equally seriously. Sometimes I think we may underestimate the power of crimes against humanity. I won't go into definitions now, but I do invite you to have a look at that, and I'm sure you will do this afternoon. And so part of what I want to share today, and in a sense it's part of my recommendation, is not to put all of your eggs into one basket. I think that would be a mistake. The International Criminal Court is an incredibly important body and holds out hope for humanity, including, I think, for Hazara people. But it's slow. We know already that it began an examination, preliminary examination into Afghanistan, I think in 2011 or 2012. There's been a lot of roadblocks along the way, and these will be discussed, I think, this afternoon on the panel that is looking at is it genocide, and still an investigation has not yet been reopened, even though it's the intention of the prosecutor to do so, who announced this some months ago. But still the pretrial chamber has not yet given the green light. We hope that it will soon, but this will take time. And as well as that, the record of the ICC is that it will focus on a few key cases, not many, and that they will take a lot of time. And I think it's necessary to look at a series of options, not excluding the issue of universal jurisdiction, which is the possibility of individual countries exercising jurisdiction over international crimes committed extraterritorially, but prosecuting within their own countries. And some countries are already looking at doing this. It has already happened in other cases. I'd also like to acknowledge that the UK, as was mentioned in the first panel, has, it hasn't finished, but it has undertaken an inquiry into persecution of Hazara both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. The first part was on Afghanistan, in fact, and it has published a preliminary report, which I've read, but I understand that this is not the final piece of work on this, and that's important. But what I want to raise here is the idea which I am interested in discussing further, of an international commission of inquiry, not just a UK one, but something which looks more broadly commission of inquiry into the situation of Hazara. I would like to say that while I'm a very strong advocate of accountability and that impunity in Afghanistan has gone back decades and continues, one of the reasons for addressing impunity and having forms of accountability is not only to punish those who are responsible, but to prevent future crimes, that it has a preventive and possibly a protective element as well. And what I would like to ask is, what are the questions that go beyond the title of the panel, Is it Genocide? My question would be questions such as, how can Hazara be protected now, today, tomorrow? What are the other mechanisms, possibilities for protection? That, I think, is my major question. I also think it would be useful for the panel later to explore not only is this genocide, but if it's genocide, what are the consequences of that? What does that mean in terms of not only accountability, but protection and prevention? And what is the expectation of how the international community should react? I said right at the beginning that the way the international community reacted to yesterday's tragedy was a few small articles. I didn't look at everything. I looked online, I looked at the BBC. It had an article, not very not the main article. The Guardian newspaper had something. The New York Times didn't have much. I couldn't see anything. Al Jazeera had a longer one. I didn't survey everything. But I think there needs to be thought about how to get the international community to react more strongly. I'm willing to be part of that. And finally, I would like to seek your advice. I would like you to come back to me after these deliberations today and tomorrow, and to tell me what you think I should do to support you, to be your partner. Thank you. And I think I don't want to end without mentioning the situation of women. Actually, I usually, and some of you know me, I usually start by talking about the appalling situation of women and the treatment of women in Afghanistan today. The staggering regression in the treatment, the situation of women. The erasure of women, made invisible in any kind of public life, be it education or employment or politics or even the ability to move or to protest, or to travel from one place to another. It's unparalleled in any other country. So I think when we also are focusing today and tomorrow on the situation of Hazara, we also need to acknowledge that for women, it's a double discrimination. It's much worse. And so I think all of the lens that we look at when we're analyzing what to do, be it through the Genocide Archive project, or be it through other steps, it ought always to be given a gender lens. How are women seeing this? What is their experience? And how should their experience be reflected? And I mean, it's great there are so many women in the room today, and leading in this event as well. That's the way it should be. But I think in all the plans and discussions and recommendations that you come out with, it's always incredibly important to reflect the situation for women, and especially for Hazara women in Afghanistan today. So I'd like to end again with thanking you for, and to say that as is usually the case, I want to listen even more than I want to speak, but I do very much appreciate this opportunity to say a few words. I don't know if there's time for Q&A, maybe not now, but I will perhaps will have time to meet with many of you later in the day. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bennett, and thank you for being here today. We appreciate it greatly.